The customer grabbed the plus-size waitress and smirked. "Stop pretending you don't like the attention." Sienna tried to pull away. He tightened his grip. Without another word, she twisted his wrist, shifted her weight, and sent him crashing onto the polished restaurant floor. The dining room fell silent. Phones appeared almost instantly. From behind the glass of a private dining room, one man watched without blinking. A slow smile crossed his face. Interesting. No one realized the only person impressed was the city's most feared mafia boss. The silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then the restaurant erupted into overlapping voices. Some diners shot to their feet, staring at the man sprawled across the polished hardwood floor. Others instinctively reached for their phones, recording every second before anyone could stop them. Crystal glasses trembled from the impact, and a tray balanced on a nearby server's shoulder rattled dangerously before she caught it. Preston Hale groaned as he pushed himself onto one elbow. His expensive tailored suit was wrinkled, his pride bruised far more than his body. He looked around the room, realizing dozens of strangers had just witnessed him lose control of a situation he had assumed would end very differently. His face flushed crimson. "You assaulted me!" he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Sienna. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Sienna's breathing came quickly, but her voice remained remarkably steady. "I asked you to let go. You attacked a paying customer. I defended myself." The distinction hung heavily in the air. No one moved. No one interrupted. Every person in the dining room had seen at least part of what happened, yet each perspective was incomplete. Some had noticed Preston cornering the waitress. Others had looked up only after hearing him hit the floor. Within moments, 2 security officers hurried into the dining room. "What happened here?" one asked. Before anyone else could answer, Preston surged to his feet. "Arrest her," he demanded. "She attacked me without warning. I want the police here immediately." Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly woman quietly shook her head. "I saw him grab her first." Another customer frowned. "I only saw the throw." A businessman muttered, "That looked excessive." The conflicting voices blended into confusion. Sienna resisted the urge to explain herself repeatedly. Her father had once told her that panic made honest people sound guilty. Instead, she took one slow breath. "He wouldn't let me leave." The room became quieter again. Security turned toward Preston. "Sir," one officer said carefully, "did you make physical contact with the employee?" "I touched her arm," Preston snapped. "That's hardly a crime." "You held my wrist," Sienna replied. "You should have taken it as a compliment." Several nearby diners visibly winced. At the far end of the restaurant, hidden behind the privacy glass of an exclusive dining room, Adrian Moretti observed every expression without saying a word. His dinner companions continued discussing business, unaware that Adrian had stopped listening several minutes earlier. Instead, he watched the waitress, not because she had thrown a man nearly twice her size onto the floor, because she hadn't celebrated it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't frightened into tears. She simply looked, disappointed, as though the entire incident had interrupted everyone else's evening more than her own. That caught his attention. Most people reacted from emotion. She had reacted from necessity. There was a difference. Adrian rose quietly. His assistant, Marco, noticed immediately. "Leaving, sir?" "No." Adrian adjusted the cuff of his jacket. "I want every security recording." Marco blinked. "From tonight? Every camera. The dining room? Every angle." Marco didn't ask why. Working for Adrian had taught him that the calmest instructions often carried the greatest importance. He stepped away to speak discreetly with restaurant management before anyone had the chance to erase, edit, or misplace the footage. Meanwhile, Preston continued shouting, "My attorneys will destroy this place. That woman belongs in jail." Sienna lowered her eyes for only a second. Not because she regretted protecting herself, but because she already feared what this meant for the restaurant she loved. Around her, co-workers watched anxiously. Some silently admired her courage. Others worried about losing wealthy customers. No one knew how the night would end. Across the room, Adrian looked once more at the waitress, standing alone amid the chaos. A faint smile returned to his face. Not the smile of a man entertained by violence, the smile of someone who had just recognized something exceedingly rare, a person who valued dignity more than comfort. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he wanted to know her name. By the time the police arrived, the atmosphere inside the steakhouse had shifted from shock to uneasy anticipation. The responding officers spoke separately with Preston, Sienna, several employees, and a handful of guests willing to give statements. Rather than jumping to conclusions, they collected names, reviewed initial evidence, and requested access to the restaurant's surveillance recordings. Preston grew increasingly irritated. "You don't need videos," he snapped. "She assaulted me. That's obvious." One officer remained calm. "The footage will help establish the full sequence of events, sir." For the first time that evening, Preston had no immediate response. While management escorted him into a private office to wait, Sienna stood near the service station, rubbing her wrist. The red marks from Preston's grip had become easier to see now that the adrenaline was fading. One of the younger servers approached cautiously. "Sienna, are you okay?" She nodded automatically. "I'm fine." A pause. Then, to everyone's surprise, she looked at the shattered dinner plates scattered near the edge of the dining room. "Do you think those plates come out of my paycheck?" The young server blinked. "What?" "The plates," Sienna repeated, almost whispering. "There were 6 of them, maybe 7. Another waitress couldn't help laughing. "Sienna, I'm serious. You just defended yourself from a man twice your size." "I know." "And you're worried about dishes?" Sienna gave an embarrassed shrug. "They're imported." Within seconds, even the exhausted kitchen staff found themselves smiling. One dishwasher poked his head through the swinging doors. "If anybody asks," he called out, "I'll say gravity attacked the plates." The room erupted into relieved laughter. For the first time since the confrontation, the suffocating tension eased. Sienna smiled despite herself. "I still feel bad." "You shouldn't," another co-worker replied gently. "I know." She looked toward the broken porcelain again. "But somebody still has to clean all this up." Without waiting for permission, she picked up a broom. 3 co-workers immediately stopped her. "No." "What?" "Sit down." "But you've done enough." Reluctantly, Sienna surrendered the broom, though she looked almost guilty for doing so. From the private dining room across the restaurant, Adrian had witnessed the entire exchange. Marco returned quietly. The manager agreed to preserve every security recording. "Good. And—" Marco hesitated. The police seemed to be treating this as possible self-defense. Adrian nodded once. As they should. Marco followed Adrian's gaze toward the service station. "The waitress?" "Yes. I've never seen someone apologize for broken plates after throwing a grown man onto the floor." A faint smile touched Adrian's lips. "Neither have I." He had expected anger, perhaps tears. Maybe panic. Instead, she worried about restaurant property. It wasn't fear that interested him. It was responsibility. Even after being humiliated by a customer, her first instinct was to think about everyone else. That told him far more than the confrontation itself. Meanwhile, restaurant manager Elise Morgan finally emerged from her office. Perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfectly controlled expression. She looked first at the police, then at the lingering guests, finally at Sienna. "Ms. Brooks." Sienna straightened immediately. "Yes, Ms. Morgan?" Elise forced a professional smile. "We'll discuss this tomorrow." "I'm sorry." Those words made several employees look up. Sorry? For what? Elise folded her arms. You've created quite a situation. Sienna lowered her eyes. I never wanted tonight to happen. No, Elise replied coolly. But it did. Without another word, she walked away to reassure nervous VIP guests that the restaurant remained fully operational. One bartender muttered under his breath, "She should be yelling at Preston." Another answered quietly, "She's worried about the restaurant's reputation." Well, Sienna is the one who almost got hurt. Neither realized Adrian had overheard them. His expression became unreadable. He had spent years watching powerful people protect appearances instead of principles. It rarely ended well. As the evening slowly returned to normal, one of the officers approached Sienna before leaving. "Ms. Brooks." "Yes?" "You handled yourself remarkably well." She looked genuinely confused. "I knocked someone down. You stopped once you were safe." "I suppose." "You didn't chase him." "No." "You didn't strike him again." "Of course not." The officer smiled. "That's usually what separates self-defense from revenge." Sienna absorbed the words quietly. She had never thought of it that way. Her father had taught her to create an opportunity to escape. Nothing more. Nothing less. Across the room, Adrian watched her thank the officer with sincere humility. No arrogance. No celebration. No desire to become a hero. Only quiet relief that the nightmare was finally ending. For reasons he still couldn't fully explain, he found himself hoping it wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Long after the last police officer had left, and the restaurant finally closed for the night, Sienna sat alone in the empty employee break room. The adrenaline was gone. Only exhaustion remained. She stared at the faint bruises forming around her wrist, tracing them absent-mindedly with her thumb. They looked strangely familiar, not because she had been hurt before, because they reminded her of another hand holding her wrist many years earlier. Only that hand had been gentle, strong, patient. Her father's. She had been 13 the first time he taught her how to escape a grab. Back then, she had rolled her eyes dramatically. "Dad," she'd complained, trying unsuccessfully to pull her hand free. "I'm never going to need this." He had smiled. "I hope you're right. So why teach me?" "Because hope isn't a plan." Young Sienna had sighed with theatrical annoyance. "I don't want to learn how to fight." His expression had immediately turned serious. "Good." She blinked. "Good? I don't want you learning how to fight either." Now it was her turn to look confused. "Then, what are we doing?" He gently adjusted her stance. "We're learning how to leave." He tightened his grip just enough to keep her from pulling away. "What do you do first?" he asked. "I pull harder." She did. Nothing happened. He smiled. Again. She tried with both hands. Still nothing. Frustration spread across her face. "It's impossible." "No." He shook his head. "You're solving the wrong problem." "What do you mean?" "You're trying to overpower someone stronger." "So?" "You don't need to be stronger." He rotated her wrist slightly. "Find the weak point." With one quick movement, her hand slipped free. She stared in disbelief. How did that happen? Because joints have directions they're not meant to resist. He chuckled softly. People think strength wins every fight. It doesn't? No. What does? Timing. For the next hour, they practiced the same movement over and over again. Not punches, not kicks, not elaborate martial arts techniques. Just one escape. Again, and again, and again. Eventually, teenage Sienna groaned dramatically. "This is boring." Her father laughed. "It should be." "Boring?" "The best self-defense is boring." She frowned. "I thought it'd be exciting." "If it's exciting," he said quietly, "something has already gone terribly wrong." Those words stayed with her long after the lesson ended. Before they packed up, He knelt so they were eye level. His voice became unusually calm. "Sienna?" "Yeah?" "I want you to remember one rule." She nodded. "If you can run, run. If someone insults you, walk away. If someone starts a fight, leave. If someone blocks your path." She hesitated. His eyes met hers. "Make space." He gave a small approving nod. Then he finished the lesson she would never forget. If someone won't let you leave, make sure you can. No anger, no hatred, no talk of revenge. Just permission to protect herself. Years later, after her father's unexpected death, that afternoon became one of the memories she treasured most. Her Aunt Gloria, a former police officer, had continued those lessons. Not by teaching violence, by repeating the same philosophy. "Your father was right," Gloria often said. "The goal isn't to win, it's to go home." Every few months they practiced together. Simple wrist escapes, breaking someone's balance, creating enough distance to run. Nothing more, nothing less. At times, Sienna wondered whether those quiet evenings in her aunt's garage had been unnecessary. For nearly 20 years, she had never needed any of it. Until tonight, back in the present, tears gathered quietly in her eyes, not from fear, from gratitude. If her father had never insisted, if Gloria had stopped practicing, if she had frozen instead of reacting, the evening might have ended very differently. She whispered into the empty room, "You were right, Dad." No one answered. Yet somehow she felt as though he already knew. Across the city, Adrian sat alone in the back seat of his car, while Marco reviewed preliminary reports from the restaurant. The surveillance manager says there are multiple camera angles. "Good." And witnesses confirm the customer refused to let her leave. Adrian looked out the window. She didn't attack. No, she escaped. Marco glanced at him in the rearview mirror. That's an important distinction. Adrian nodded slowly. The most important one. For years he had built an empire by studying people. Most revealed themselves under pressure. Tonight, Sienna Brooks had done the same. She hadn't used force to dominate. She had used just enough to reclaim her freedom. To Adrian, that wasn't aggression. It was discipline. And discipline was something he respected more than power. As the city lights drifted past the car window, one quiet thought settled into his mind. Meeting Sienna Brooks had not been an accident. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could yet see. The next morning, Sienna arrived at the restaurant nearly 30 minutes early. She barely slept the night before. Not because she regretted defending herself, because she dreaded what it might cost. The steakhouse had been her second home for almost 8 years. She knew every regular customer's favorite table, every chef's morning routine, and every server's birthday. The thought that one terrible incident might erase years of hard work weighed heavily on her heart. As she stepped through the employee entrance, conversations stopped. A few co-workers offered sympathetic smiles. Others avoided eye contact, unsure what to say. One hostess hurried over and wrapped Sienna in a brief hug. "I'm glad you're okay." Sienna smiled faintly. "So am I." Before either woman could continue, Elise Morgan appeared from her office. "Ms. Brooks." Her tone was polite, cold, professional. "Please come with me." The office door closed quietly behind them. Elise folded her hands neatly across the desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports." Sienna remained standing. "I understand. The situation has become complicated. I know. Our legal department is already receiving inquiries." Sienna lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Elise sighed. "This isn't about whether you're sorry. Then what is it?" "Our reputation." The answer landed like a stone. Elise continued. "Videos from last night are spreading online." "Already?" "They're everywhere." Sienna felt her stomach tighten. Somebody had uploaded one of the recordings less than an hour after the incident. By sunrise, millions of people had already watched fragments of the confrontation. Fragments. Not the whole story. Only the moment Preston crashed to the floor. Without context, it looked shocking. Without context, it looked violent. Elise slid a printed document across the desk. Pending the investigation, I'm placing you on temporary suspension. Sienna stared at the paper. Not fired. Suspended. Even so, the words hurt. For how long? Until we determine whether your actions violated company policy. Sienna looked up slowly. I was trying to leave. I understand that's your position. My position. Elise's expression remained carefully neutral. The restaurant cannot appear biased before all evidence has been reviewed. Sienna wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded quietly. When should I return my uniform? Elise blinked. You don't need to. Oh? A brief silence followed. Should I still water the plant in the staff lounge? Elise looked genuinely confused.
The plant?
I usually water it every Thursday. For the first time that morning, Elise seemed at a loss for words. Even now, Sienna was worrying about a struggling office fern. Outside the restaurant, public opinion grew louder by the hour. Television stations replayed the short cell phone clip repeatedly. Social media exploded with debate. That waitress overreacted. No woman should put her hands on a customer. Others disagreed just as passionately. Watch how he grabs her wrist. She only escaped. Good for her. The internet had reached its familiar verdict. Everyone had an opinion. Very few had the full story. Meanwhile, Preston Hale wasted no time. He appeared outside his attorney's office, surrounded by cameras. This level of violence against customers cannot be tolerated, he declared dramatically. My legal team will pursue every available remedy. Reporters scribbled furiously. One journalist asked, witnesses claim you repeatedly grabbed the employee. Preston's smile faltered. I was merely trying to get her attention. Another reporter pressed further. Did she ask you to let go? No further questions. He walked away before anyone could ask another. Across town, Adrian watched the interview from his office. The television remained muted. He didn't need sound to recognize dishonesty. Marco entered carrying a secure tablet. The surveillance recordings have been preserved. All of them? Every camera. And copies. Already encrypted. Adrian nodded with quiet satisfaction. Good. Marco hesitated. Mr. Hale's attorneys have begun contacting the restaurant. I expected that. They're demanding compensation. Adrian looked once more at the frozen image of Preston, confidently addressing reporters. The loudest story, Adrian said calmly, is rarely the true one. Marco understood immediately. You think the footage will change everything? I don't think. Adrian's gaze settled on the tablet containing every angle of the confrontation. I know. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself a small smile. Truth had an advantage over lies. It didn't need to be invented. It only needed the chance to be seen. And very soon, everyone would see exactly what had happened inside that dining room. 3 days after the incident, the restaurant's conference room became the center of attention. Representatives from corporate headquarters sat on one side of the long table. Restaurant management occupied the other. 2 attorneys observed quietly, legal pads open before them. Near the back of the room sat Sienna. She had been asked to attend, but not to speak unless questioned. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, wondering whether this meeting would determine the future she had spent 8 years building. Across the table, Preston Hale looked as confident as ever. His expensive suit was immaculate. His expression suggested the outcome had already been decided. I trust, he said smoothly, we can resolve this without unnecessary complications. No one answered. Instead, the lead investigator, dimmed the lights. We'll begin reviewing the surveillance footage. The first camera showed the dining room from above. Sienna approached Preston's table with a professional smile, placed his order before him, and politely asked whether he needed anything else. Nothing unusual. The second camera captured a different angle. Preston leaned back in his chair and made a comment that caused Sienna's smile to fade politely. She answered briefly and turned to leave. Then came the third recording. Crystal clear. Preston reached out. His fingers wrapped firmly around her wrist. The room fell silent. On the screen, Sienna tried to continue walking. She couldn't. The footage contained no audio, yet her lips were easy to read. "Please let go." Preston laughed. Instead of releasing her, he tightened his grip and stepped into her path. The fourth camera showed nearby guests beginning to notice. One couple exchanged uneasy glances. Another diner looked ready to intervene. Then everything happened exactly as Sienna had described. She twisted toward the opening in his grip, shifted her weight, redirected his balance. Preston crashed backward onto the floor. She immediately stepped away. She did not strike him again. She did not yell. She did not advance. She simply created distance. The investigator paused the recording. No further physical contact occurred after the escape. No one disagreed. The remaining cameras confirmed the same sequence from different perspectives. Every angle told the identical story. Sienna attempted to leave. Preston prevented her. She escaped using only the force necessary to regain her freedom. Nothing more. Nothing less. The room remained silent for several long seconds. One attorney finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale," Preston shifted uncomfortably. "Would you care to explain why you continued restraining an employee after she attempted to leave?" He searched for an answer. None came. "The video speaks for itself," another attorney said quietly. For the first time since the investigation began, Preston looked genuinely uncertain. Outside the conference room, another version of the same footage was already spreading across social media. This time, people weren't watching a 10-second cell phone clip. They were watching the complete incident. Public opinion shifted with astonishing speed. She asked him to let go. She tried to walk away twice. That wasn't an attack. That was textbook self-defense. Former law enforcement officers explained the restraint. Self-defense instructors praised her control. Behavioral psychologists noted that she had responded only after every peaceful option failed. Within hours, the woman many had criticized became a symbol of calm courage. Sienna knew none of this. She remained seated outside the conference room, staring at the floor. When the door finally opened, she expected someone to tell her she could collect her belongings. Instead, Elise stepped out, looking unusually pale. Before she could speak, another group entered the building, well-dressed, calm, confident. At their center walked Adrian Moretti. Every executive in the restaurant immediately stood. Even the corporate representatives looked surprised. "Mr. Moretti." Adrian acknowledged them with a polite nod. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." The regional director hurried forward. "To what do we owe the pleasure? I understand this establishment has recently become available for acquisition." The room became perfectly still. Several executives exchanged confused glances. Adrian continued as though discussing the weather. "My legal team completed negotiations this morning." He handed over a folder. "The purchase has been finalized." Silence. Complete silence. Within a single morning, ownership of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants had changed hands. Adrian looked around the room before his eyes settled briefly on Sienna. His expression remained calm, professional, yet unmistakably warm. "I have only one announcement." Everyone listened. "No employee working under my company," he paused deliberately, "will ever be punished for protecting themselves from physical harm." The words echoed through the conference room. No dramatic speech, no lengthy explanation, just one clear principle. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then someone near the back began clapping. Another employee joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. Several servers wiped tears from their eyes. The kitchen staff cheered openly. Even a few executives found themselves applauding. Sienna remained frozen. She wasn't accustomed to being defended. She certainly wasn't accustomed to someone changing an entire company's policy because of what had happened to her. Adrian met her eyes for only a moment. There was no pity in his gaze. Only respect. In that brief exchange, Sienna understood something important. He hadn't rescued her. He had simply refused to let the truth lose to convenience. And for the first time since the terrifying night in the dining room, she finally believed justice had found its way to her. The restaurant reopened 2 days later. The headlines had finally begun to fade, but inside the building, something had undeniably changed. The staff stood a little straighter. The managers spoke more carefully. Even the regular customers seemed unusually kind, many offering encouraging smiles to the employees as they passed. Sienna walked through the front entrance, feeling strangely out of place. She had returned expecting awkward glances or whispered conversations. Instead, the hostess behind the podium grinned. "Welcome back." A line cook leaned out from the kitchen. "We saved your favorite blueberry muffins," someone else called from the bar. "And the fern survived without you." Sienna laughed for what felt like the first time in days. "I was actually worried about that." "You were worried about the plant, while the whole city was arguing about you." It looked thirsty. The staff burst into laughter again. The familiar warmth reminded her why she had loved working there for so many years. Late that afternoon, Elise approached her. Her posture remained professional, but the sharp confidence she usually carried had softened. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you." Sienna blinked. "Me? Yes? Did I accidentally break something else?" Elise stared for a second, before letting out a quiet sigh that almost sounded like amusement. "No. Are you sure?" "Quite sure." Sienna nodded nervously. "I'll try not to break anything during the meeting." Adrian's temporary office overlooked the dining room through tall windows. He was reviewing several reports when Sienna knocked lightly. "Come in." She stepped inside. "You wanted to see me?" "I did." She remained standing, unsure whether to sit, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether this was another meeting that might change her life. Adrian noticed immediately. "You don't have to look so nervous." "I'm trying not to." "How's that going?" She considered the question honestly. "Not very well." A faint smile appeared on his face. "Please, sit." She obeyed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply felt thoughtful. Finally, Adrian folded the report in front of him. "I've reviewed every witness statement." Sienna nodded. "So have I. I've also reviewed every camera angle." "I heard." He studied her expression. "You never used more force than necessary." She looked down. "My father wouldn't have approved if I had." That answer caught his attention. "He taught you?" "Years ago." "Military?" She smiled gently. "No." "Police?" "My aunt." "And your father?" "He just wanted me to come home safely." Adrian remained quiet for several seconds. "I think he succeeded." He reached for another folder. "I didn't ask you here to discuss the incident." "No?" "No." He slid several documents across the desk. "I'd like your help." Sienna looked genuinely puzzled. "My help?" "Our hospitality group owns restaurants, hotels, cafes, and event venues throughout the region." She nodded slowly. "I know. We have security policies. I'm sure you do. They're inadequate." She looked up. "They focus on protecting property." Another pause. "Not people." The simple admission surprised her. Most executives she had met defended existing systems. Adrian was acknowledging their weakness. "I want to change that," he continued. "I'd like you to join the committee, redesigning employee safety procedures." Sienna stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "I'm a waitress. You're also the person who exposed a flaw no report ever did. I don't know anything about corporate policy. You know what it feels like to need protection." She couldn't argue with that. She looked through the proposal. Training programs, emergency response procedures, anonymous reporting systems, manager accountability. The plans were thorough. Still, one important detail was missing. She closed the folder. "I have one condition." Adrian leaned back slightly. "I'm listening. No employee should ever have to pay for learning how to protect themselves." He watched her carefully. "I think every server, bartender, hostess, dishwasher, cook, and cleaner should receive professional self-defense training." She hurried to clarify.
"Not fighting. Escaping."
"Exactly." She swallowed. "My father always said the goal isn't to win. It's to get home." The room became very quiet. Adrian thought about the countless security consultants he had hired over the years. Most talked about control. Most talked about force. Very few talked about dignity. He extended his hand across the desk. "Done." Sienna blinked. "Done?" "We'll provide the training. For every employee? For every employee. Across all your businesses. Every one." She looked at him in disbelief. "You agreed awfully fast." "I made the decision before inviting you." "You did?" "I was hoping you'd ask." For the first time, she laughed without restraint. "You already knew what condition I'd have." "I had a suspicion." "What gave me away?" "You were worried about broken plates before you worried about yourself." She covered her face in embarrassment. "I can't believe people keep bringing that up. I hope they never stop." As she stood to leave, Adrian walked her to the office door. Neither hurried to open it. There was a comfortable stillness between them now. Not romance. Not yet. Something quieter. Mutual respect. Before she stepped outside, Sienna turned back. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing more than one bad night." Adrian met her eyes. "Miss Brooks." She waited. Character is easiest to recognize when someone's having their worst day. She smiled softly. "And yours?" "My worst day?" He nodded. "I imagine that's how we'll eventually meet it." Neither realized that the conversation would stay with them long after the office door closed. It was the first moment they stopped being a chairman and an employee, and quietly, almost imperceptibly, they had begun becoming two people learning to trust one another. Months passed quietly. The incident that had once dominated headlines gradually disappeared from public conversation, replaced by newer scandals and fresher stories. Inside Moretti Hospitality, however, its impact never faded. Every restaurant now displayed clear workplace safety policies near employee entrances. Managers completed mandatory training on handling harassment complaints. Anonymous reporting systems became standard. Most importantly, every new employee attended a practical self-defense workshop during orientation. Not to learn how to fight, to learn how to get home safely. The idea had begun with one waitress. Now it protected thousands. Sienna found herself traveling between different restaurants several days each month. She spoke with servers, bartenders, hosts, cooks, and cleaners. Instead of standing behind a podium delivering lectures, she preferred gathering everyone into small circles. She always began the same way. "I'm not here because I'm brave." The room would inevitably grow quiet. "I'm here because one day I was scared, and someone had taught me what to do." That honesty mattered. People listened because she never pretended to be fearless. She simply refused to let fear decide for her. Adrian attended many of those sessions without announcing himself. Sometimes he stood near the back of the room. Sometimes he watched through the office windows. Occasionally he asked thoughtful questions after everyone else had left. He rarely interrupted. He preferred observing. Each month, he discovered another reason to admire Sienna. She remembered every employee's name. She noticed who seemed anxious. She quietly checked on the dishwasher who had recently lost his mother. She congratulated a young hostess after her college acceptance. She even learned enough Spanish to thank several kitchen employees in their own language. Leadership, Adrian realized, wasn't always found in boardrooms. Sometimes it wore an apron. One rainy evening, after finishing a training session at one of the company's hotels, Adrian offered to drive Sienna home. She hesitated for only a moment before accepting. The city lights shimmered across the wet streets as silence settled comfortably between them. Unlike their first meetings, the quiet no longer felt uncertain. It felt familiar. Halfway through the drive, Adrian finally spoke. "Were you scared that night?" Sienna looked out the window. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she laughed softly. "Terrified." Adrian glanced toward her. "You didn't look terrified." "I know." She smiled to herself. "I was shaking so badly afterward that I spilled tea all over the break room. You never mentioned that. I was hoping nobody noticed. I don't think anyone did." "They did." She laughed again. "They were just kind enough to pretend they didn't." The warmth in her voice made Adrian smile. "So what happened? You mean, when he grabbed me?" He nodded. Sienna rested one hand lightly against the car door. "I remember thinking about running, but you couldn't. He wouldn't let me." Another brief silence. "My father always said fear isn't the enemy." Adrian looked at her curiously. "What is?" "Letting fear make your decisions." She met his eyes. "I was terrified." She shrugged gently. "I just refused to let fear choose for me." Those words stayed in the car long after she finished speaking. For a man who had spent years building power through discipline, they felt profoundly true. Over the following weeks, something subtle changed between them. Neither acknowledged it aloud. Adrian began finding reasons to visit whichever location Sienna happened to be working in. Sometimes he ordered coffee he didn't particularly want. Sometimes he arrived just as her training sessions ended. Employees noticed. The rumors began almost immediately. One bartender whispered, "I think the chairman likes her." A chef grinned. "I think she's the only person who treats him like a normal human being." The funniest part was that neither Adrian nor Sienna seemed aware of the growing speculation. To them, conversations still revolved around employee safety, restaurant operations, books they had recently read, and stories about Sienna's aunt, Gloria. The friendship grew naturally. Without games. Without pretense. Without either of them trying to impress the other. One autumn evening, after closing a successful staff conference, Adrian walked beside Sienna through the quiet courtyard outside the hotel. The air carried the scent of rain and flowering trees. Neither wanted the evening to end. Finally, Adrian stopped walking. "Sienna," she turned. "Yes? I've met remarkable people all my life." She waited. Some were powerful. He smiled faintly. Some were brilliant. Another pause. But very few were genuinely good. Emotion flickered across her face. "You've changed how I lead." His voice remained calm. "You've changed how I measure strength." Sienna felt tears gathering unexpectedly. Not because of the compliment, because every word sounded sincere. Adrian took one careful step closer. Not enough to invade her space, only enough to let her know she was no longer standing alone. For the first time in many years, neither of them feared what tomorrow might bring. Because somewhere between admiration, trust, and countless ordinary conversations, love had quietly found them. 1 year later, the story that had once begun with a frightened waitress and a crowded dining room had become something far greater than either Sienna or Adrian had imagined. Across every restaurant, hotel, cafe, and event venue owned by Moretti Hospitality, employee safety was no longer treated as an afterthought. Every new hire received workplace harassment awareness training. Every manager completed conflict de-escalation certification. Every employee, regardless of position, attended practical self-defense classes designed around one simple principle: escape. Not retaliation, not violence, just the confidence to return home safely. The policies were soon recognized as some of the strongest in the hospitality industry. Other companies quietly began adopting similar programs. What had started as one woman's instinctive act of self-protection had inspired lasting change far beyond a single restaurant. That afternoon, Sienna finished leading another orientation class for newly hired employees. As people gathered their notebooks and prepared to leave, a young waitress lingered near the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 20. She looked nervous. "Ms. Brooks?" Sienna smiled warmly. "You can call me Sienna." The young woman nodded shyly. "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "I watched the videos months ago." Sienna's smile faded slightly. "There are much better things to watch online." The young waitress laughed. "Maybe, but because of you." She paused, searching for the right words. "I know I don't have to stay silent anymore." The room became wonderfully quiet. Sienna felt unexpected emotion rise in her chest. She gently squeezed the young woman's hand. "I hope you never have to use anything we teach." "So do I." "But now," the waitress smiled with growing confidence, "I know I can protect myself if I ever need to." As she walked away, Sienna stood silently for a moment, realizing that her father's lesson had now reached people he would never meet. His kindness, his wisdom, his belief that courage could be quiet, continued living through others. That evening, the company hosted a celebration marking the first anniversary of its employee safety initiative. The ballroom was filled with cooks, servers, bartenders, managers, hotel staff, and trainers from every location. Laughter echoed through the room. Stories were shared. Friendships had formed across departments that had once barely known each other. Standing near the balcony, Adrian watched Sienna speaking with a group of employees. She laughed freely. The fear he had first seen hidden behind her composure was gone. In its place stood quiet confidence. Not because life had become easier, because she had discovered how many lives one courageous decision could touch. He walked toward her. Without saying a word, he gently took her hand. She looked up and smiled. "I've been looking for you." "I know," he replied softly. The conversations around them gradually faded as friends and co-workers noticed the moment. Adrian held her gaze. "There is something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She waited. His voice was calm, certain, and filled with unmistakable affection. "That's why I admired you." A gentle smile crossed his face. "Long before I loved you." Tears shimmered in Sienna's eyes. Not tears of sadness, not tears of fear, only gratitude. She squeezed his hand. "And I'm very glad." She smiled through those happy tears. You kept watching. Laughter and applause filled the ballroom. Around them stood people who no longer believed that dignity belonged only to the powerful, because one ordinary waitress had shown them something extraordinary. True strength does not come from intimidating others. It comes from protecting your own dignity, helping others find theirs, and choosing courage over fear, even when your hands are trembling.